When we look back at American history, we tend to picture our presidents as marble statues, stoic, flawless, and perfectly dignified. We see the towering monuments and imagine a lineage of perfectly polished statesmen. Then you look a little closer and find out George Washington didn't have wooden teeth. He had a Frankenstein mix of cow teeth, hippopotamus ivory, and, quite literally, other human teeth, all jammed together with metal springs that made his jaw bulge out. Or take John Adams. If you visited the White House during his term, you might have been barked at by a chaotic little menace running the halls. That was his dog, who he decided to name Satan. The pristine textbook version of history often hides the truth of the people who actually held the office. We lose the reality of their lives when we sanitize them into marble monuments. To really understand the men who have sat in the Oval Office, we have to stop looking at their policies for a second and start looking at their most unhinged, deeply human archetypes. In the early days of the Republic, political survival was often tied to physical dominance. Violence was a frequent and normalized part of life for those in power. Andrew Jackson took this to an extreme. During an 1806 duel, he let his opponent shoot him right in the chest, stood his ground while bleeding out, and calmly returned fire to kill the man with a single shot. Abraham Lincoln brought that same raw physicality. Long before he was the great emancipator, he was a 6'4" wrestling champion who earned a local gang's respect after he picked up their leader and slammed him into the dirt. That culture of invulnerability carried right into the 20th century. While campaigning for a third term, Teddy Roosevelt was shot at point-blank range and flat out refused to go to the hospital. The bullet tore through his coat, an eyeglass case, and a 50-page folded speech, which slowed it down just enough to spare his life. With the lead lodged near his ribs, Roosevelt stood up and delivered an 84-minute address while bleeding into his shirt. These leaders survived the Oval Office because they were built to take a hit. In these formative years, projecting strength meant proving your body was nearly indestructible. On the other end of the spectrum were the intellectual oddballs. James Garfield possessed immense mental processing power. He was an ambidextrous genius who could write Greek with one hand while writing Latin with the other, all while publishing original mathematical proofs for the Pythagorean theorem. Yet that intense intellect often paired with extreme social anxiety. Herbert Hoover hated encountering his own servants so much that the White House installed an elaborate system of warning bells. Whenever he walked down the hall, his staff had to flatten themselves against the walls or dive into empty rooms just to avoid him. Even Franklin D. Roosevelt had paralyzing quirks. He suffered from triskaidekaphobia, an intense fear of the number 13. He refused to travel on the 13th or sit at a table with 13 guests. A man who stared down Hitler and navigated the Great Depression was terrified of a prime number. The historical record shows that the intellectual brilliance required to run the country often shared the same space as these intense personal eccentricities. Then there are the presidents who operated completely free of normal social boundaries. John Quincy Adams stripped down every morning for a nude swim in the Potomac River, until a reporter sat on his clothes and refused to leave until he gave her an interview. Lyndon B. Johnson had absolutely no concept of personal space. He regularly forced his staff and reporters to conduct official government meetings while he sat on the toilet with the door wide open. Warren G. Harding was equally reckless, hosting raucous poker nights in the White House, where he casually gambled away a priceless set of historic china dating all the way back to James Madison. When you hand someone the highest office in the land and isolate them behind layers of security, the basic human mechanisms for shame and decorum tend to completely erode. The darkest historical archetype involves the shadow powers, leaders whose carefully crafted public images hid massive private contradictions. Thomas Jefferson wrote that all men are created equal, yet modern DNA testing confirms he maintained a decades-long secret relationship with his enslaved sister-in-law, Sally Hemings, keeping her and the 6 children he fathered enslaved. Sometimes the hidden rulers were literally running the country. In 1919, Woodrow Wilson suffered a severe stroke that left him paralyzed. For 17 months, First Lady Edith Wilson quietly took over, operating entirely behind the scenes. She screened every visitor, controlled the flow of paperwork, and effectively directed the executive branch while the American public had no idea the president was incapacitated. The most classified secrets of the presidency are often the private cover-ups orchestrated by those closest to the president's bed. While the modern presidency is a constant media spectacle, these unscripted, human layers still manage to break through the professional polish. We've had Jimmy Carter filing an official government report about a UFO sighting, and George W. Bush casually dodging a pair of size 10 shoes hurled at his head during a press conference. Barack Obama was so intensely competitive, he had the White House tennis court converted into a basketball court just so he could run pickup games against NBA stars like LeBron James and Kobe Bryant. And Joe Biden's career traces a 50-year arc from a devastating family tragedy that forced him to take his Senate oath in a hospital room, leading all the way to the ultimate comeback to secure the presidency. Realizing that this republic was built by brawlers, oddballs, and deeply flawed individuals strips away the intimidating marble facade. It makes the massive span of American history relatable, and it proves that the future of the country is exactly where it's always been, in perfectly messy human hands.